Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone today in this March the 6th, Friday, top of the morning for me. It's 6 a.m. here in Secwepemc in the unceded and never surrender lands of the Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc peoples in Secwepemc, today known as Kamloops, British Columbia in Canada. We have a panel of amazing presentations this morning. We're going to start with Tony Circus. Is that right? Please.
It's Cherkes, but don't worry about it. You're doing quite fine.
Cherkes. Good.
Yes.
No, thank you for correcting my pronunciation. Tony Cherkes from Tallinn University is going to be presenting the great tradition and cybernetics towards technology, diversity, and relationality. Then we have Washik Silan and Yongchen Lu from the National Donghua University in Taiwan, presenting decolonizing knowledge and ontological insecurity, critical security practices of the Pangcha Salaka Tamdo, oh my God, movement. We should have rehearsed this. Um, then we have Nadej Nesimaya Na and Ben Klashe from Tallinn University. They are presenting a critical relational approach to climate governance in Africa, lessons from the grassroots and local cosmology. And finally, we have Victor Jimenez Rivera from Tallinn University as well, doing European integration and state capture in Serbia, a radical relational approach. And so all of these are chapters of the book project that we are preparing, and so happy to be in this international space with everyone sharing in this seminar. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to start with Tony. And so I'm going to ask each of the panel groups to perhaps introduce yourselves as well. If you want to do a land acknowledgement as well, that would be great. And we will start now. Tony, will you take it away? Do you have slides? Would you like to share them?
No, I don't. I don't really
Okay,
have slides. I didn't feel like I never usually have slides. I always prefer
that's
to kind
okay.
of interact with the audience, even virtually. So, um, and it's a pleasure to be here again. I presented almost exactly a year ago, this very same chapter. Last year I was in Cyprus at an event, and now I'm here in Lithuania, actually. No land acknowledgements in this sense, but I do want to express my solidarity with all the oppressed people. And I think at this very moment, with what's going on in Iran in particular, I think we need to be aware what kind of constellation of violence we inhabit in the world. So my presentation, as Monica said, is titled Beyond the Great Tradition in Cybernetics Towards Technodiversity and Relationality. And just briefly, for those who haven't heard me last year, I don't know if all of us were here, who are here, we're there then. The Great Tradition is Hannah Arendt's concept, which the Great Tradition is kind of her concept for the tradition of Western political theorizing, which, according to her, kind of spans the period of nearly, over 1,500 years, or nearly 2,000 years, from Plato all the way to Nietzsche and Marx and Hegel. Nietzsche being the youngest of the three, of course. And cybernetics is a sort of a break in that tradition, at least according to kind of Arendtian interpretation, but I disagree. And I think that precisely in that reason why I disagree lies the importance of this concept for not just Arendt herself, which she did not know, but also for politics of relationality more broadly. So I work from within the critical relational turn in international relations. The questions that I ask, however, are less to do with how we can imagine a more relational world. And obviously, I support people who do these kinds of things. But what I'm interested in is specifically the politics of those relations. I ask questions on why, of relations, how of relations, for whom are relations. And I think this kind of places me in the critical relational group. And this chapter and this consequently this presentation kind of asked the question of what relations in the age of big tech capitalism, why relations in kind of the cybernetic age that we live in. And just to clarify my terms, by cybernetics, I mean in a very kind of basic sense, any understanding of the world that features an exchange of information, right? And this was inaugurated by cybernetics in the mid 20th century. It was developed, amongst others, by Norbert Wiener, who was a physicist, well, mathematician and philosopher. Well, he was trained in both, and he developed the concept of cybernetics, which in ancient Greek, kubernetes means the steersman, the helmsman. He wanted to understand systems of nudging and manipulation that rested not on kind of a direct exertion of force, but on collection of information and signals, and then kind of modifying behaviors of not just humans, but of animals too, and mechanical systems as well. That was his primary focus, mechanical systems through those signals. So he was one of the people who actually basically developed the idea, the concepts, and the maths behind rocket defense today. So the systems that actually can shoot missiles in the air, because they can actually predict and anticipate where the rockets will be, you know, throughout their journey. So that's kind of cybernetics. But cybernetics is bigger than that. It's rooted in a kind of Marshall ontology, but it's bigger than that. Obviously, our computers are cybernetic systems. Big tech capitalism is essentially a cybernetic system. And so last year, I focused much more on the Arendtian theorizing, but this year I want to focus a little bit more on like this politics of relationality, because that's what I'm thinking about. And I'll be presenting this, I'm very excited, in May at the Finnish Political Science Conference in Tampere. I forget what the actual name of the conference is, but it's Finnish Political Associations Conference in Tampere. And so my main claim here, and well, it will be when I write the chapter as well, is that there is something much more problematic, if not sinister, that about contemporary cybernetics, which is exemplified the best via big tech. By big tech, I mean in particular companies like Alphabet or Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and others. There's much more sinister, something much more sinister about their politics of relations that I think we in the relational turn are not really paying attention to. And so the claim that I make is that their claim is that we do not need politics in relations. The big tech's claim is that we do not need politics relations. And they say that, you know, if you give us your data, our computational systems will pretty much give you everything that you need, right? They will give you knowledge, they will give you products, they will give you science, they will give you the future. And that's the claim on the future that they make. And my argument is that, you know, we in the relational turn have not spent enough time reflecting on this move. Because it is a profoundly relational move. And in May 2024, Satya Nadella, the current CEO of Microsoft, he was presenting this new generation of PCs that they have called Copilot Plus PCs, which is basically kind of AI enabled PCs, because they have this particular chips, NVIDIA chips that called neural processing units that can perform very kind of complex AI tasks. And so he said that in the future, quote, AI will be distributed and it will turn the world itself into a prompt. And so, end quote. And so the world will, open quote again, instantly see us, hear, reason about our intent and our surroundings, end quote. So the whole of reality, the vision of the future is that the whole of reality is made as if it were computational. The whole of reality is premised on the idea that the better we train our models, the more responsive they can be to us. And this is a profoundly relational claim, because algorithms, according to Louisa Moore and other computational scholars, or scholars, critical computation scholars, they act precisely through ourselves in relation to the world and in relation to them. They don't act independently of us. They don't create knowledge independently of what humans, for example, do, the metadata that we generate, upon which they are trained and upon which they continuously optimize their operations, both in the kind of autonomously or with the help of software developers and engineers. And there is something profound here that brings me back to Arendt, because the great tradition, according to Arendt, and this is something that I think also the Arendtian turn has not exploited enough from her own work. Um, for her, the entirety, she charges effectively the whole of traditional Western political theorizing with being prejudiced against the body. And she says, um, basically, she quotes that she says that this kind of comes in the history of Western political theory because traditional philosophers from Plato onwards have actually resented, and I quote her here, there's this time-honored resentment of the philosopher against the human condition of having a body, end quote. And so in her context, this was connected to discussion of contemplation, that this idea that philosophers in contemplating, they reach somehow the truth of ideas, the truth of reality, which is obviously the most famous example is Plato's Philosopher Kings, with which he ends the Republic, which kind of gave us the contemporary Christian idea of hell, because he said those who did not follow the Philosopher Kings, they would end up in a very dark and miserable place, etc., etc. But the Philosopher Kings knew best because they were the ones who contemplated. They were the reasonable ones, the rational ones, who were separate from the daily life. They were separate from the basic needs of humanity, and they were close to the light of the truth, which is, by the way, the allegory of Plato's cave as well. And what Arendt was saying is that this is the line that you can basically trace in Western political theory from Plato through Augustine to Duns Scotus to Niccolo Machiavelli to Jean-Jacques Rousseau to Hegel to Kant to Nietzsche to Marx. All of these thinkers were prejudiced in essence, against the human condition of having a body. And what Arendt means by that is simply they did not really want to think politics relationally. They did not think that politics happens between the people and in the world. They refused to accept that to be political means to be able to be free, which is why she calls freedom the condition of politics. Without it, you do not really have politics. Instead, they preferred what Laura Zanotti calls this prescription ethics. You should do politics in this way because this corresponds to the model. You should do, practice the being political in this particular way, which, historically has excluded women, for example, from being political beings, excluded racialized people from being gendered in many other ways, and racialized people from being the subjects of politics and from being the carriers of something political. But Arendt makes this really weird twist, and she says that this has ended at the end of 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century with Nietzsche. Not in a sense that he ended it, but that he was kind of one of the last people who was thinking in this way, and that his own philosophy kind of problematized that this is not necessarily my focus, but I'm just interested in the implications of that. And she basically said that this has ended because Cartesianism died. And this is a radical claim if we approach it from a relational standpoint, because relational ontology is built essentially as a sort of an antithesis to Cartesian thinking, the dualisms of nature and culture, mind and body. And Arendt comes and she says this has disappeared with the nuclear bomb, because for her, nuclear bomb and the development of automation, which is basically cybernetics, because she says that with the nuclear bomb and cybernetics, we stopped thinking about the planet and the human as these kind of beings or entities that are separate from each other and separate from the world. The nuclear bomb actually brought extraterrestrial processes on the planet, like radioisotopes of a particular kind that never existed on the planet before. And automation reconstituted the human being into loops, and the world around it, of course, into sort of these loops of information feedbacks. And interestingly, contemporary philosophy of technology agrees with Arendt without really acknowledging her contribution to this. So we have Yu Kui, who is a very kind of notable philosopher of technology nowadays, and Washak and I recently published a piece where we draw from his ideas and where he basically says that cybernetics is a post-Cartesian thing. Cartesianism has been dead for nearly 100 years. We need to stop thinking against dualisms. We need to start thinking against relations, essentially. And not against relations, but in a sense of we need to start thinking politics of relations. And I kind of agree with that. But my claim is that even though Cartesianism died in a sense of the mind versus body and the nature versus culture splits that are characteristic of kind of Western rationalist Cartesian philosophy, what is happening nowadays, what we have under the guise of relationalism, is this duality of information and body. And this is a very interesting dualism because it tells us simply what Satya Nadella from earlier in this presentation said, is that you give us your data, your metadata, information about yourself, information about the social worlds that you inhabit, and then AI or computational systems, they're going to be able to actually construct some sort of a rational and objective truth of life out of it. They're going to help us, you know, get into this grand digital future where, as Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said, we've actually resolved the future already. And he's not wrong. Obviously, I disagree with him, but he's not wrong because even Martin Heidegger in 1976 said that cybernetics completes Western metaphysics, which was a huge statement at the time. And people misread it as if he was saying that this is the end of philosophy. No, but it's the end of the Cartesian binaries that have actually set up Western philosophy, modern philosophy. But actually, what happens today with big tech systems is something quite opposite. And this is where I think that we, from the relational turn, should, you know, intervene more and pay attention to, but we don't for many reasons, some of which are we just don't focus on. Yeah, thank you, Monica. We just don't focus on technology anymore as a site of philosophical engagement in the way that I think we should. We have other priorities. I mean, in the Anthropocene, obviously, we focus a lot on biodiversity, other ways of living than, for example, the modern Western ways of living. And obviously, I belong to these movements and I support them. But I also think that the danger of contemporary computational capitalism is that it is trying to totalize everything. And in this total grasp is such that it is very deeply relational, right? It connects all of us in this through the internet, through the web, through social media, etc., in this kind of giant village of networks and connections. But at the same time, it separates us from embodiment. And in that sense, it actually brings back the great tradition under the guise of relational thinking. On a deeper sense, it brings back Western political thinking, Western political philosophical thinking, that is, or a sort of a Western ontology of separation back into reality in a very big way. And one example where this is most obvious is, for example, drone warfare. When unmanned aerial systems, when they look for targets, if we have a target that we do not know, these are called the signature strikes. So what you have to do is you need to actually detect a person. And this is a very racialized and gendered process because you do not know if the person is a terrorist. They're used in counterinsurgency operations. You do not know that a person is a terrorist, but then you collect information about them. For example, their phone calls, their messages, the way they move, their heat signature, their behavioral analysis, meaning people they've interacted with. It's also known as a social interaction analysis. And you kind of plug it into these algorithmic systems. The Israeli Defense Forces call one of these systems the gospel, which is very sinister. And this system essentially tells you, yes, this person has a very high likelihood of being a terrorist, and so you move up on the kill list. But what happens actually is that more often than not, they're wrong. And despite the claims to precision, the accuracy of these systems is very low. For example, in kind of the most recent brutalization of Gaza, Israel was claiming that they had the ratio of casualties to combatants as 1 to 1. meaning that they said they killed around 140 people in one day, and they said 70 of them were actually people that were terrorists, and around 70 were civilians that were marked as terrorists by gospel and other systems. Um, and this is all premised on extracting information, because none of this involves actually talking to these people, interacting with them in any meaningful way. This is all done by clandestine systems that are immanently relational, because they connect everything around us into a sort of a relational image of our lives. But at the same time, they're premised on a new kind of dualism, which takes the body to be the site of extractive activity. The body now, or any kind of material substratum, the earth, the body, that's why in planetary discourses, like people like Bruno Latour, they're advocating, or they were advocating, because he's dead now, sadly, this idea that we need to, install more complex technological equipment so that we can sense the planet and respond to climate change. This is all premised on this idea that if we take information, we will know the truth of something. But this is a very Western techno-truthist and account of things. But this is our relational reality nowadays. And so just to sum it up now, I think that kind of going back to Arendt, which is a weird step if you're working from critical relational ontology, and some of her concepts and her critique of Western political philosophy, and departing from her at certain moments, I think allows us a very potent insight into how the politics of big tech and politics of kind of these advanced computational systems, such as used in drone warfare and counterinsurgency operations, how they're actually premised on the very same assumptions that gave rise to what we nowadays call kind of Cartesian and Western centric modes of thinking. And I think that if we paid a little bit more attention to that from within relational ontology across disciplines, so not just in international relations theory, I think we could actually advance a very potent critical relational view of computation and technology. And I think this just helps us. And ultimately, the argument is also that we need to move towards techno diversity more, and this is where I kind of talk to you, Kui, but I want to stop here now because that's kind of the last part of the paper that I'm not yet at at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tony, for this fascinating talk and so timely to think about these things. Thank you so much for your talk. Looking forward to this chapter and looking forward to the discussion as well. Let's move on to Washak and Young Chang. Please introduce yourself, and if you've got slides, share them. If not, take it away, please, for
So
us.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Tony, for the fascinating talk. And while Yunzhen's putting up the PowerPoint, um, I'm Washa Shilan, and my co-presenter is Yunzhen. And together we're going to present this topic that maybe some of you have seen in the wonderful conference that we had the chance to witness and experience in Tallinn. And but at the moment, we're still kind of putting in like together pieces of how to braid the Western knowledge of radical relationalism in the sense of ontological insecurity, together with the indigenous, more like land-based embodied knowledge of Sakarabandao movement, which Yongzhen will put out more in detail later. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Yongzhen, and we very look forward to your feedback later on of how we can better develop this piece. So Yongzhen, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Okay. My name is Yongzhen. Thank you very much for being here. Today, I'll talk about decolonizing knowledge and ontological insecurity through a case study in Taiwan, the Bangsa Sagalamdao movement. This presentation addresses three key points. National security policies can themselves become a threat to indigenous peoples. Second, how an indigenous community responds. Third, reconstructing the definition of security. Taiwan is a settler society shaped by multiple colonial regimes. At the national level, Taiwan faces a highly precarious geopolitical situation. It is excluded from the United Nations system and exists under constant pressure from mainland China. This produces a strong sense of existential insecurity at the state level, often described as the feeling of being an international orphan. This national insecurity strongly shapes how security is defined and prioritized. Taiwan's population is overwhelmingly Han, and political power is largely concentrated in Han hands. Over the past 30 years, the state has introduced many indigenous rights policies, including a presidential apology in 2016. However, despite these symbolic and legal reforms, colonial power structures remain largely unchanged. The dominant Han-centric worldview still shapes institutions, policies, and definitions of progress, especially in education. As a Han researcher studying an indigenous movement, my ethical reflection involves remaining alert to my own Han-centric worldview, ensuring knowledge production supports indigenous agency and autonomy, prioritizing structural change. The Sagladamdao movement emerges from a long history of colonial assimilation through education. For decades, Bangsa language, culture, and values were excluded from schools. Intergenerational transmission was severely disrupted. In 2014, education policies began to loosen slightly, allowing limited forms of alternative education, but only under strict state conditions. In 2016, Bangsa community members come together to ask, how can we replace cultural deprivation with cultural autonomy? They sought to establish an indigenous school. After 9 years of negotiations with educational bureaucracies, they still do not have a formally recognized school. They named the school Sagladamdao, meaning education for being a Bangsa person. This name itself is a political statement. I use two theoretical perspectives: critical rational security as a diagnostic tool to expand security beyond the state to focus on communities and individuals; critical multiculturalism as the path for decolonization to reform education as the decolonial social movement. A key concept in this talk is ontological insecurity. It refers to the threat to the continuity of self-identity and the sense of existential security. For marginalized communities, this insecurity is produced by colonial knowledge systems, which stigmatize indigenous identities and create cultural self-doubt. Bangsa people express a deep fear. If we stay in the mainstream system, we will disappear. This is not just emotional fear, it's a structural threat to collective identity. How national security produces insecurity. First, exclusionary security logic. Because Taiwan's national security discourse centers on survival of the state becomes the primary security object. Non-state forms of insecurity, such as cultural survival, are marginalized or treated as secondary. Second, value sublimation. Indigenous cultural autonomy is treated as a non-essential issue. Third, the crowding out effect. When Bangsa people attempt autonomous action, bureaucratic procedures drain their time, energy, and resources, blocking real self-determination. Although Taiwan promotes multicultural policies, these often contain reproductive flows. Indigenous peoples are managed as objects of governments, not recognized as sovereign knowledge producers. As a result, even well-intentioned policies can still feel deeply colonial. For example, in school curricula, indigenous peoples are represented through trivialization, fragmentation, and marginalization. Faced with these limits, the community turned inward. They formed grassroots organizations to pursue educational autonomy. At its core, this is a struggle for epistemological liberation, the right to define knowledge, value, and reality on their own terms. Their approach is as follows. First, building grassroots organizations. Through collective action, the community makes their ontological insecurity visible. For this, in negotiation with the state, asserts that their survival is a security priority. Stage 2, educational reconstruction principle. Learning within culture, not learning culture. The movement implements a radical multicultural education approach through defragmenting the curriculum. Education must occur within cultural life itself, restoring the holistic worldview of the Bangsa. Redefining culture. Culture is redefined not as static heritage, but as a living, adapting, decolonial knowledge system that resists colonialism. Critique of mainstream. This directly resists the Han-centric impulse to substantialize, simplify, cut, and package culture to fit school schedules. Core is to interrupt the mechanism of reproduction of mainstream values within the education system. Third, decolonizing knowledge. Sakadam Dao emphasizes practical embodied knowledge, knowledge learned through doing, living, and related to land. This challenges colonial knowledge systems that treat culture as static artifacts. Through action, the movement challenges the state's monopoly over security definitions, redefines security as the survival of community and culture, reclaims valuable knowledge from Han-centric standards to Bangsa ancestral wisdom, reclaims valuable language from Mandarin dominant to Bangsa. When national security discourse threatens indigenous survival, the Bangsa people respond through radical decolonial education. Their struggle shows that state-centered security has blind spots. Local bottom-up perspectives are essential for redefining security. Ultimately, this case reminds us that security is not only about protecting states, but about protecting ways of being. I pay my respect to the Bangsa people. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Yun Cheng, for this presentation and ending with time to spare, which is great. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next one, and then we'll have some time for discussion here in a minute. Thank you so much. Next in our list are Nadej Nzeyimana and Ben Klashe from Tallinn University. Thank you so much. You're putting up your slides already. I see them in my screen. So please take it away, Nadej and Ben.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Yes, I'm Benjamin Klasche. I'm an associate professor at Tallinn University, and Nadej Nzeyimana is our PhD student working on climate governance. We want to present today our book chapter towards the radical relational reimagining of global climate governance through African eco-critical thought. I will start us off here, go a little bit through where is this research problem coming from, what are we working on here, how does radical relationalism figure in, is there something like alternative global governance approaches, and if we have them, how do they look? Where else can we look for them? And then Nadesh will take over and talk about African knowledge, helping us decolonizing knowledge that we have about global governance and how we can reimagine this. So let's see. First, starting with the need for all of this. So the climate crisis. Here is just a little graphic from the panel for climate change. Sorry, just showcasing the vulnerability. So the global southern countries, as we refer to them, mostly in South Asia and Africa, are the countries that will suffer the most, are the most vulnerable to climate change issues, even though they have not really contributed to the problem of climate change. Farhana Sultana refers to all of this as climate coloniality, which is a central concept in our paper. Climate coloniality, she says, is the still ongoing impact of the legacies of imperial violence, which created the situation of today, marginalizes populations disproportionately, and they then are disproportionately more affected by natural disasters. Even worse, Sultana says that death and their misery is silently accepted, which we basically see everywhere else, also outside of the climate change. So coloniality just in the sector of climate as well. She also points down, here we want to bring it to the relational aspect, that climate vulnerability and injustices that come with it in post-colonial occupied settler colonial context, these are not contingent happenings. This just doesn't happen to be like this. These are deeply relationally interwoven with the violent structures that existed before: racial capitalism, neoliberalist economic growth, geopolitics directed by the West, of course, international development, and even such things as pop culture and other cultural goods that we consume out of the West. All of this repurposes and then exacerbates these structural issues, these violent structures. Continuing, what do we do about it? Really, not much at the moment. We have climate global governance models. The Paris Agreement perhaps being the most out there. We all have heard something about it. It has the Kyoto Protocol as a predecessor. We have the meeting of the parties, the COP meeting every year. We have some other ideas about carbon taxing, etc. The EU makes green deals. The US cancels them, as we know. But all of these tools, I would maybe call them, towards managing the climate crisis are failing. My colleagues and I, for example, have written about this, how all these governance tools are not relational, though they try to deal with a deeply relational problem, and therefore they fail. We need to look for alternatives for this. We hope that we find some of them in African, what we use kind of a shorthand here, and Nadesh might talk about for a second, in African cosmology and philosophy. Let's have a look. Why Africa? Here we cite Mbembe, who says it can only come out of Africa. Africa is the place that has the challenges, where all of these concerns come together. But it's also the place with the most potential. This is where kind of the huge, kind of vast resources of animistic reserves, as Mbembe calls them, are available, and it just has to come out of Africa. There's no other option in Mbembe's mind. We can discuss, of course. Last thing from me. So how do we want to go about this? We think of global governance in the same way that Amaya Kwariatsu does, which is, by the way, a great relational thinker that we don't talk enough about, I think, in our circles. She works in international relations mostly. And she has a great article on alternative global governances, where she points out that global governances are deeply ontological. They are like kind of this universalized idea of the West. They are provincializing everything. Everything kind of has to be made the same way. And as soon as something doesn't fit the mold of global governance mechanisms, they will not be useful for them. So she thinks about alternatives for this. She keeps it kind of vague where they grow out of, kind of a pluriversal idea, decolonial idea that they are grown out of the local context to best fit new governance mechanisms. And this is hopefully what we can find when we now look to Africa. Nadesh.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So as Ben said, Nadesh Nzeimana, and I'm a PhD student at Taiwan University. So for this, I will just start from here. He already just give the introduction, and to achieve the aim of this article, which is not only contributing at decolonizing the knowledge, or for also contributing for the epistemic justice for people from the African continent, but who still facing and bear the burden of their climate crisis, yet they are also excluded in decision making and also policy making. And we focus on African philosophies and cosmologies, which we keep refer to as African thought, in reimagining climate governance mechanism as an avenue for alternative to govern the climate crisis. Both African epistemologies and ontologies have been historically excluded from knowledge production and are therefore often missing in global governance practices, as already been explained. But also finding this alternative, it's very important that also we include them and also their lived experiences. We also emphasizes on both academic and non-academic work of Africans and Black descendants. We can also ask maybe why we keep saying African, but we find also we find that because they have been always also marginalized as one, and also we find that also to put a spotlight to them, it's also important also that we keep also refer to them also as our African continent, despite that we also acknowledge that it's different, and also there are different also realities on the ground, despite also some other similarities on the continent. So we focus on non-academic because also we find that not only storytelling particularly is essential for transmission of knowledge within the sub-Saharan communities, but also we wanted to, if we were initially when we were thinking that we can also include our own readings for this non-academic work, but the time and also the space is it's not allowing it. But we managed to also to do an illustrative case where we did a reading of critical analysis of some 3 novels from 2 different articles of the African novels. So we find that this also will help to introduce this very important avenue, but also maybe for this future project we can then include our own readings for the non-academic work. Yeah, you can go for the next. So in the reading of this eco-critical analysis, there were some relational themes that really stood out as important for environmental ethics, but also that we find that can inform global governance. These themes appear across the sub-Saharan region, though they are known by different names. For instance, last time we talked about the Bantu, but also we also find also some other, but this Bantu, they covers a big part of the sub-Saharan part, but also we also found different other cosmologies like Akan from Ghana. So talking about this eco-communitarianism and interconnectedness of all beings, it's one of some of the themes that really stood out in this reading, and also shows that it can bring some information, also the guidance on how we can also reimagining or also serve as alternatives to the climates of the governance of the climate crisis. Also, there is intergenerational responsibility, and one of the quotes that is also in the article is from Mandela, who said that the land is not our inheritance it's not an inheritance from our ancestors, but a loan from our children. This really also shows that there is ethical balance between the present and the future, which also shows the solidarity between generations, that we just don't live and we just don't live in we have this earth, but not only from us, but it's really from our ancestors, but also we have to keep it well to the next generation. For the also the shared humanity, I think it covers also the same as the communitarianism and the interconnectedness of all the beings, because it also shows that we are all humans despite different race, different geographical locations, that we are all connected, and we can also provide care to anyone just despite that we don't think that we are the same, but we are the same. And the next slide, we just give an example for, I think, yes, this was what I was, can you go for the next slide again? Yes, I wanted to show this, one of the example, because last time we already talked about Bantu, but we found also this akan Adinkra symbol. I'm still learning how to pronounce this. It's from Ghana, but it just shows that it's an image that shows, it's from their mythology, that an image that shows that it's one crocodile with two heads, but they say it depends on how you look at it. You can say it's two crocodiles, or you can just say it's one crocodile with two heads, despite of your, depending on your perspective. So this is really also explain it well, because it shows this conjoined crocodile, just they share one single stomach, but sometimes they also fight over food because they want to find their food, but at the end of the day they all just have one stomach. So it's really also illustrates that the root challenge also for addressing the climate crisis, because people just feel they are just confined their geographical borders, national identity, racial division, all those. But at the end of the day, we just have one earth, and also we are just same people. Like if something happens, we are also connected. If something happens one part, it will also affect. Yeah, thank you, Monica. So means, yeah, it will also affect other people. So it was really a good reading, I would say, for all this experience, and also as we also emphasize this of the lived experiences, because the climate crisis really also, if we want to find also the effective solutions, we need to understand people who are facing it, but also we need to include also other way of living, so that we can find solutions to this crisis. Ben said it's that after more than like 30 years, we are still also having the same issue. We don't even reach the target that has been set. So I think I will just stop so I don't go beyond the time. Thank you. But there is a conclusion. This is the conclusion. I don't know if
I think you did it already.
Okay.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadej and Ben. I think I'm now finding threads there between the presentations with the relationality in the land, and of course the topic of climate change, and how we can embrace different cosmologies to approach these crises, but also the existential issue of not embracing a land-based education, as in the case that Yongshen and Washak presented. And then there with the relationality, the disembodied relationality of cybernetics, which is fascinating. So let's see what more threads we find. The last presentation is today by Victor Jimenez Rivera, also from Tallinn University, and He will talk to us about European integration. Take it away, Victor.
Hello, yes, so I'm Victor Jimenez Rivera. I have presented a few times here, so I'll keep the introduction a little bit brief so we have a bit more time for discussion. But I'm also Taiwan University, as Monica said. I'm a doctoral student and research fellow at Taiwan University. I'm colleagues with Ben, with Nadesh, and with Tony. So I'll be presenting my chapter on unequal knowledge production in EU-Serbia enlargement relations. So I will also try to keep this brief, as I have presented this last year, just like Tony mentioned on his presentation as well. So the overview of my chapter, I want to present the research problem that I am analyzing here, which is the issue of Europeanization in not just in Serbia. So I am highlighting Serbia as my case study, of course, but this is something that applies to other countries in the region, which I'm planning to allude to, at least in the article, to an extent. But what I want to be doing here is problematize this narrative, which I see as a hegemonic narrative that is being spun by actors in these relations, which are in a privileged position economically and politically. I want to problematize this as highly contradictory, and I want to show how the discourse on Europeanization has been essentialist. So I want to critique it from a relational perspective, and I want to show how it has been essentialist in the sense that it has compartmentalized and provincialized the different aspects of the Europeanization process without taking the whole relation into account, and how this has been operationalized to mask what I deem to be deeply unequal relations, both within Serbia and between Serbia and the European institutions. So this hegemonic narrative I see as being centered on issues such as economic growth, democratization, integration of Serbia into European norms and values, and so on, and how this is the core frame that has been used both by Serbian elite actors and by European institutional actors to legitimize on the one hand, the entrenchment of a fused business political elite in Serbia that has captured state institutions at the expense of the vast majority of the Serbian population, and how this has also entrenched a process of integration into European institutions that has taken for granted European norms and values. So the theoretical contribution that I want to do with this chapter, as I put it here, is to adopt a deeply relational approach that centers the intersectionality both of the protest movement, but also of the support for this entrenched elite that I discussed. So I see both of these as being intersectional to an extent, of fusing a lot of different interests into their support for either support or opposition in this case. So I want to understand the whole process of European integration as I put it here, as a complex, unknown web of relations that reflects both material and ideational relations, both, as I said, within Serbia and between Serbia and the EU. And how these relations have, what they have in common is that they enable extraction from marginalized communities in Serbia towards elites in the country, and also simultaneously from Serbia as a semi-peripheral area to the EU's core. So I want to focus on knowledge production, given the constraints of the book chapter. I thought that this will be the most so knowledge production on these relations that shows these taken for granted nature of European norms and values. That will be, in my opinion, the most valuable way to show how these processes operate. So that's what I want to be focusing on. And the knowledge production here would be that which is produced by these elite actors to legitimize the way that they are operating. And I want to put the Serbian case forward as exemplary of the globalist as a relational framework. So I'll talk about this more in a little bit. But first, I also wanted to show an overview of what my case study is, so very briefly, because I think we don't have much more time left. So, so what I problematize is these relations between European integration and state capture in Serbia. So these I see as a single process, so to speak. So that is my case in my research, and I want to see how Serbia's EU candidacy is intimately tied with these processes of state capture and of extraction, especially when it comes to green extractivism, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But what I want to show is how the Serbian government, which is made up of people who had been part of the 1990s regime headed by Milosevic, which had been opposed by the EU, and which the EU played somewhat of a role in supporting its deposition, how these actors remained business elite actors in Serbia to an extent, and how they returned to power in 2012, which was the same year that Serbia officially became a candidate to join the EU, and how these elite actors then became entrenched in power and systematically captured state institutions, business, the media, and so on, and how the EU has materially and to an extent ideationally as well supported this. In its approach, which has in the literature been criticized for favoring stabiliocratic regimes, as they have been called in the Balkans and also in Central and Eastern Europe, such as Hungary and Slovakia and whatnot. So what I am criticizing here is that while this has been identified and understood in mainstream literature, the reasoning that has been given to it has been misleading to an extent, or equivocal, as it has been. So this EU's approach has been attributed to toleration of stabiliocratic regimes on the EU's part, and lack of interest in the region, EU's failure to discipline such regimes. So this I criticize as an essentialist framing that takes the EU's norms and values for granted as being inherently desirable values that semi-peripheral states ought to adopt and integrate into. I problematize these as not just being essentialist, but also as being process reductionist as well, and substantialist, and being part of the problem in reproducing this hegemonic narrative that still entrenches this view of the EU's as a uniquely democratic force for good in Europe and more broadly. And as I said before, I put this in this framework of the globalist, this epistemic framework that has been put forward, that identifies the relations inherent in the relationship between the global north and countries that for the most part have been part of the so-called post-socialist world as unique and different from the relations between global north and the global south. Sorry, just need to take a little drink because I've been talking too much. So I see this globalist conceptual framework as applying to the case of Serbia as in a 2020 article, Müller, who I have not quoted on the slide, but I'm citing in the paper, described the globalist as a liminal space in between the global north and the global south that experiences a unique dual exclusion. So it is excluded both from approaches centering the global north, such as those that take for granted the EU's values, but also from approaches which are post-colonial in nature, but which center only on the global south. I do see that countries in the global east, like Serbia, have different set of relations with the global north that are not framed by the legacies of colonialism, as in the case of the global south, but which are still deeply unequal. And EU integration and its associated processes in Serbia are exemplary of these. What I put here as well is that I am taking in my work a strategic essentialism and also strategic methodological nationalism, in that taking these shortcuts, I guess, so to speak, is necessary for me to put this case forward and identify these relations and these processes, and then be able to extrapolate them to the region as a whole. And I'm also saying that I'm taking a strategic use of methodological nationalism here in centering the Serbian case, given the particularities of the Serbian case, as Serbia as a state and as a society does display, I think, qualitatively important differences from other states in the region, in that it was the victim of NATO strikes in the 1990s, which has converted with uniquely different attitude towards Euro-Atlantic institutions that is not seen in other countries in the region, like Albania or Macedonia, which do suffer from similarly extractive relations with the EU. And also these strategic use of methodological nationalism was important in my case, given also the uniquely important status of Serbia when it comes to the issue of green extractivism, as Serbia is home to the Jadar Valley lithium mine that I am talking about here on the slide, which is being put forward as a sacrifice zone from which lithium can be extracted for the purpose of Europe's energy independence, the expense of local populations being displaced and the local environment being polluted beyond repair. So I conceptualize these as a sacrifice zone that the Serbian government is content with enabling us, given the entrenched nature of their power in Serbia. They do benefit economically. So this project, is expected to bring, according to the Rio Tinto Corporation, which is operating it and which is problematic for many reasons in other parts of the non-global north parts of the world. It estimates that this can bring about $2.5 billion of FDI into Serbia, which would disproportionately be taken over by the Serbian government. So I think I'll leave it here, as I see that Monica just said 2 minutes, but let's just leave it here and open up the discussion.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Victor. And thank you so much to all of our presenters today. Again, some more strands coming up here. You were talking, Victor, about knowledge production, and I think to an extent our panelists have engaged in that, in knowledge, in epistemic justice, in um, looking at, and I see Tony sadly has gone. I had a couple of questions for him as well, but opening up for Q&A and wondering if there would be anyone that would like to point at even more strands of convergence or specific questions to specific panelists. Um, I see Sultan has raised his hand, so you go first, Sultan, please.
So just one, since the subtitle of the seminar series is putting chapters in the dialogue with each other, and Tony is not able to respond in person here, but let me just highlight one commonality between his work and mine, and at the risk of sounding somewhat repetitive, because last year we were already discussing these topics. So the most important commonality with my analysis, my critical study of the dominant school of thought in the sociology of value is this notion that human behavior is driven or guided by kind of algorithms. So these are cultural values for a school of thought. So the idea that cultural values are these quote-unquote independent variables that propel, steer individuals. And this thought, like this uncritical application of some very restrictive view of cybernetics, this algorithm-driven thing is firmly embedded in the neoliberal firmament, and is profoundly racist, because in fact the neoliberal school of thought is predicated on the idea that differences in economic outcomes like income, wealth, and so on merely reflect differences in cultural inputs. And of course, cultural inputs are those values that act as algorithms and notice that it's values, the algorithms that do most of the acting, not even individuals, are the basic units of analysis in this neoliberal school of thought. And I am especially increasingly irritated by this ritualistic invocation, especially among students, of quote-unquote data-driven systems. You know, like I get a lot of student theses to review, and one common theme is that things like Spotify or Airbnb are merely data-driven things. And this dovetails nicely with the neoliberal notion that thanks to state-of-the-art tech and AI, there's no really room anymore for politics, because the best we can do is to retreat from politics and let the market work its magic. This is kind of a Hayekian thought, Hayek's notion of spontaneous order. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Zoltan. It's it's interesting to see how many presentations today have actually referred to the relationality of the land embodiment, and how the non-relationality or the more substantialist worldviews intend to be more exploitative, extractivist. And yet I would say from these presentations, the outlier in a way is the first presentation, in the sense of these algorithms and the if you will, taking the body out of the equation, or the embodiment, or the embodied relationality that we are necessarily need to consider when speaking about being an embodied entity in the land. Yeah, I wonder if there's anyone else who would like to ask or find their common threads. I don't see any hands up. One thing that I was thinking about when Tony was talking was how repeatedly, and I don't know if this is a thing in the way in which Eurocentric thinking functions, because there's been a number of times when people are said, "Oh yeah, we've overcome that," where the Cartesianism is being left behind, and then it just kind of reappears over and over again, and that I mean, the way in which Tony talks about the difference, and Cartesian difference between mind and body and separation, and then how it kind of has come back between body and information, I think, is that what he said? That separation there that is kind of being reinscribed, this duality between information and body or embodiment. And I don't know. It's something like human beings, especially in the Western Eurocentric academic world, are so fascinated by that cybernetic or computational relationality, and yet the other more embodied, ancestral relationality with organic relationality keeps being put aside, and is kind of killing us today. I mean, with the climate crisis that Ben Sanadej's chapter is looking into, um, I totally agree with this position that it is indigenous ways of being and knowing that may actually have the solutions to the crisis of our time and the epistemic justices of our time. And that's perhaps where we need to turn for wisdom and solutions.
Yeah. Maybe
Yeah,
Monica, if I may just
for sure. Go ahead.
go from there, because I know, like, I think Tony phrases this as a critique of not doing this work, as you were saying. So, like, kind of to just take the existence of the algorithm, of the non-human, but the technical one, right? Not the spiritual or animistic, as a given, right? Maybe as this extension of human, even, like, and now I'm thinking of this as from the Estonian context. Of course, I don't know how much familiar you are with this, but we are pushing the AI leap as hard as possible. So, like, this is all the Estonian government and any business here, and of course this is also happening otherwhere, they talk about, and it's this, yeah, hailbringer in a way. This will save us from all the other crises. I think this is how it's phrased in the, within our neoliberal capitalist setting.
Yeah.
And actually, this work that he is trying to do is I think, would be very important there to actually show, or like use it as the point of critique of removing the human from it and showing how. And now I'm wondering where I'm going with my thought, because this is where a paper needs to be written, I guess. But I see I see the value there somehow to
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
critique our open-armed embrace of
Yeah.
technology here, and yeah.
Totally. And how, what I think and I find of value specifically with the critique with which we started is also to say, and this is something that Tony referred to in his talk, how ineffective it is, how prone to error. And it's not just error in the oopsies, there's an error. No, it's in the killing machines that are created, specifically that what he calls like really perverse, I think it was what he was saying, um, the calling the gospel, this AI-driven machinery of killing that makes just so many mistakes and is deeply racist and biased. And all those biases, like Victor is also talking in his presentation, that are embedded there in received truths, right? What values are the ones that are the good ones? Oh, it's the European ones, of course, the colonizers' ones. And then all the wisdom, the relational, deeply relational and radical relational wisdom that exists in different ways of knowing and being that are not monolithic and Eurocentric, are sidelined. And that is the deepest shame. I wonder if there's anyone who would like to comment to that from your work, from your perspective. I see Sultan's hand up. Anyone else? Just so that there's... Oh, go ahead, Sultan.
Sorry, at the risk of
No problem.
being annoying, I can't help. I have this question to all of you guys working in Estonia, although my understanding is that none of you are of Estonian ethnicity or even Estonian nationals, but you're given your workplace and your residence, you're kind of familiar with the Estonian political context. Two questions, two very small questions, but very pointed focus. One is that, am I correct that in the post-Soviet era in Estonia, there is this tendency to project an image of Estonia as this super high-tech hub? So you're kind of nodding in agreement. So that's the easy part. The more difficult part would be, am I right? This is something tentative. Is that in being a high-tech hub and projecting this image, it also dovetails nicely with a very restrictive and kind of subtly racist image of North European civilization as being kind of detached, more contemplative, more contemplating, as opposed to being more passion-driven Southern, attitudes. If you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even wondering, Monica, Washak, and Yongchen were just there too. But and this clean tech model, yeah, lends itself to also separate yourself from the Slavic Central Eastern Europe, which I think is what, when you refer to as the passionate and Southern, this is what the Estonians have in mind there as well. So yeah, it helps fight the racist tropes, the opposite, right? To kind of strengthen them. So yeah, I mean, you actually stated it the way it is, I think. Quite much so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry,
see-
Alison.
I see Alison's hand up, and I was wondering, Washak, were you gonna say something since you unmuted yourself? I thought you were gonna start
How did you
speaking.
know that? Oh my God, you're so perceptive. I was just trying to chime in because I really appreciate Zoltan's filling in the silence, and I wanted to be supportive. So I was also like recently in Estonia together with Ben and Monica, and it was really, I think, just observing from Finland. I feel that Estonia has been like recent years trying to also like establish this the kind of a brand for itself, like really making the digital nomads passport much more easier, and also like all digitalizing everything, and also using it as a way to differentiate from those they don't want to be. And then I think of a very recent example of like a visit to the National Museum in Tartu in Estonia, and in this permanent exhibition they have this great whole of Estonian being one of the three Uralic speaking states. So in addition to Finland and Hungary, and kind of also being a savior and also the big brother role, in addition to these Karelians and Nenets and all the other linguistic minorities in Russia, and it's a very nice exhibition in a way that it's all like high tech and interactive, but also it kind of also inserts this nationalistic tropes of trying to establish this like a greater Uralic nation, and and also like some ways that when they're portraying like you we mentioned about like Slavic people. So in one of the screens that they are also like grouping like, okay, so how many language similarities we all of us shared, and then they put out everybody. And the second screen they actually show that the recent genetic composition of how many percentage of blood of the Estonian is shared with these people and these people. So I could look into it to see that if there is like a Northern or Southern European division, but I think for sure they're using all this data we're talking about to kind of carving a way of what they wanted to see themselves for the future.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I had seen Allison's hand up, but you put it down, Allison, and then Victor? Or
I just have general thoughts, but if Victor wants to go first.
I just had a small comment on this idea of the niche that Estonia has been carving for itself. It's not being pushed as much as it used to in the past, but Estonia has also put itself forward as this cybersecurity hub in Northern Europe, which has been, I think, a core aspect of its national identity for the. Yeah, just as Benjamin says, we have been working hard to advertise Estonia's brand here, but Estonia has been carving itself this niche as NATO's cybersecurity specialist, which comes from Estonia's response in 2007 to Russia's cyber attacks of Estonia's banking system, and I believe some other systems, which I feel like these became a big part of Estonia's civic identity as well. How Estonia used to be this country that was heavily oppressed by the evil East, and now can stand up for itself because of this technology that it has been able to develop thanks to its turn towards Europe. So I think that has been a big part of Estonia's national identity that now people like Kaja Kallas, in her position of power in the European Union, has also been carrying forward.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Washak.
I was just thinking that Alison, do you want to go forward? Because I feel like I just cut in line. But do you?
Sure, I'll just very quickly a couple of things that came up in thinking about Tony's use of the word sinister, and thinking of the insidiousness of racial capitalism. And one of the interesting things that I notice in healthcare is it's sort of like, and it speaks to, I guess, how we think. It almost seems like the more we, and I use that very generically, think of how we're all interconnected and interrelated, the more people seem to retreat from engaging with that. And it's like their way in healthcare, their way of dealing with it is through algorithms, which are binary systems based on, the whole 0-1 thing, if this, then that, yes, no, you answer that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I sense that there's something there with computational systems and how the basic function of the algorithms are set up. And I'm wondering if anybody has any input or knowledge about like quantum systems that rely on a different algorithmic base. I don't know. I have a very hazy engagement with it, so I'm not sure how that sort of plays out. But I'm wondering if algorithms are used in international relation systems, if they're used in like the way policy at various governmental levels, like with respect to what Sheik and Yongzheng were talking about today, if those are applied there as a way of dealing with the overwhelm of relational systems and how that overwhelm kind of feeds into how we think about bigger problems and wicked problems and things like this. And I guess in the context of what Zoltan was asking about Estonia, the whole idea of branding, right? That's also in a way kind of a dualistic binary thing. And, you know, we're not going to say what we are, but we're going to say what we're not. You know, and I just these are all ideas like they're very like hazy and out there. And sorry, that's not very, I guess, kind of like Ben. I
I
don't know
think
where I'm going with this, but
I'm sorry, but I think it's funny how we are like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's so interesting how these points of convergence, and how in a way we're seeing the relationality, and for the market liberal us moderns way of thinking, how we tend to go to, yes, the stuff that is more mainstream, the algorithm, the AI, the push for AI, the whole cybernetic thing. People try and go there more than with the I'm gonna call it, I was gonna say the actual and real, but let's just call it the pragmatic relationality of being embodied entities and the ancient wisdom that is already there, but we're, because of the capitalist world system, I think, or the global capitalism, we're still just turning away and saying, oh no, that's inferior. That's, let's look at AI and what AI can do for us, when it's just so deeply dis entangled from those relationalities that are more like vital. I don't know. I don't know
well,
if there's anyone.
yeah, the stripping of the politics of relationality from daily life, like I mean, and I come across this literally every hour that I'm at work,
Mm,
is there's this idea that politics is not involved. There's this idea that,
mm,
you know, these decisions are not being inflected by, you know, gendering and racialization and socioeconomic status, class
mm,
status, and things like that. And yet the opposite is true. But people, it's like like Pons years ago wrote about this ontology of forgetting, you know, and I just want like, it's like this ontology of forgetting is built into how we
yeah.
think about things. And
Mm.
yeah, I see it. There's just so many connections with everybody that talked today. So thank you all very much for
Ontology of,
your
thank you so much, Allison. And on that note, ontology of forgetting, I wonder if you're quoting someone or, yeah, interesting. Let's do the sharing of the references. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm gonna stop the recording to, so yeah, to say our final chattery goodbyes.